Do you guys remember that part in The Matrix where they stick that big old needle in the back of Neo's head and they download the jujitsu program? And he remarks, "Jujitsu? I know jujitsu?" Well, wouldn't it be awesome if we could memorize our words that quickly? Obviously we can't, but in this video, I'm going to give you several methods which will help you memorize words a lot faster. And not just memorize the words, but actually be able to use them in Russian conversations fluently. And as a bonus little tip, I'm going to tell you how to handle those 2 or 3 words that you can't ever seem to remember. Давайте начнем. Let's get started. Всем привет. Меня зовут Jared, я делаю русский язык легким. Hey everybody, my name's Jared and I make the Russian language easy. The things that I'm going to share with you today are from my own experience. They're things that's worked for me and for some of my friends. And what I've noticed that when I'm memorizing Russian words, my brain, my mind, it kind of breaks them down into 3 sections. I have to first normalize the word, then I have to memorize the word, and then I have to internalize the word. Now, this doesn't mean it takes, one word a whole 2 minutes to memorize. Sometimes I can do it in 1 second. Sometimes it takes me a whole day. So I'm going to go through each one of those steps and explain what they are, how my mind's working. I think your mind works in the same way, and I think it will be beneficial to you. And along each one of those steps, I'm going to give you some different methods that will help you move on to the next step a little bit faster. So the first one is what I call normalize. And when you're just starting to learn out Russian, this is a pretty important step. All these words are going to sound very foreign to you, all the gutturals and the consonants and the string, and it's all just going to sound really weird to you. So you have to spend a lot of time just saying the words, just so that your mind doesn't outright reject them. Be like, this is too hard. I don't know what this is. Don't bother me with it. Once you've been studying Russian for a while, this isn't as important of a step. In fact, I would say probably 95% of the words that I learn right now, I've already kind of skipped over that step. But every now and then I run across a word, I'm like, what is that? That is so weird to me. And I just have to say it 5, 6, 7, 8 times until I'm just like, okay, my mind is used to hearing it. One of the words that's always weird to me is raduga. I don't know why, but to this day, it just sounds wrong to me. It sounds like the stress is in the wrong place. It doesn't sound like a Russian word, but it is what it is. Maybe I'm still working on that normalized phase. It means rainbow. And at this stage, we're not working on memorizing it. We're just becoming familiar with it. We're just trying to make our mind accept it and not outright reject it. Now, that kind of brings us into the second phase, which is the memorizing phase. And this is the phase that most people focus on. Okay, that's just I've got a Russian word. What's the English equivalent? And I want to memorize those 2 so that when I need it, it comes to mind. In this phase, if you need a Russian word, it will come to you, but it doesn't come to you easily or fluently or naturally. And you may be speaking a little slowly and a little clunky. And that's okay. This is important. But когда вы говорите по-русски, вы не хотите думать, о каком слове вам нужно. Вы просто хотите говорить. When you speak Russian, you don't want to think about the words that you need. You just want to be able to speak and throw it out there, as you do in your native tongue. And you're going to get to that point. We're going to get to that phase here in just a second. But right now, we're just working on the memorization phase. Okay, one of the more popular methods for memorizing words is flashcards, and I think that works great. Nowadays, I would strongly encourage you to go out and get some flashcards there. A lot of them are already pre-built, so you don't have to spend your time, creating them. They're just already there. You can go and download them. There's a couple different programs out there. Anki, I think I'm saying that right. ANKI is a popular one. Quizlet, that's the one I use. I know they use that in kind of the elementary schools, but what I like about Quizlet is when I put the words in, they have a little speaker button down in the bottom, and I can actually click on that and hear the word in Russian. It's awesome because then not only am I memorizing the word, but I know that I'm memorizing it correctly. I've got the stress right. I've got the pronunciation right. It's really slick. Okay, flashcards. That's pretty basic. We all know that. The other thing I would encourage you to do is refer to them throughout the day. This is the key to memorizing anything. What I would recommend is either refer to your flashcards throughout the day, or what I like to do is I will just, with my phone, if I've got a list of words written down that I want to memorize, or it's out of a book or something like that, I'll just take a picture of it and I refer to that list throughout the day. Very important. Maybe I'm in line to get my coffee or a drink or something like that. I just pop that open and I look there and I just look at 1 or 2 words. And I don't worry about going through all of them, right? But I just okay, let's just start at the top. Yep. Okay, that's the one I'm going to learn while I'm in line right now. That's what's important, is that as you go throughout the day, you have a quick and easy way of referring to the words and bringing your mind back to it. Lenin, communism, back in the time, they had a very famous saying, which they still kind of quote today in a joking manner, is "Повторение мать учения." Repetition is the mother of all learning. And it's true. You just want to be able to repeat them. Here's one other little tip in the flashcards that a lot of people don't do. They normally start with the English, right? Let's say they'll look at a word for glasses, like the kind of glasses you wear, очки. And so they'll say glasses, очки, glasses, очки, and they go through and do that. And they check the back and like, yeah, okay, I got it right. Once you feel like you've got the word mastered or whenever, it's not super important, flip it around, read the Russian, очки. You want to be able to go both ways. If you're always just going English to Russian, that's good. You'll, eventually be able to speak that. But you also want to be able to understand Russians as they're speaking to you. You want it to become back. And not only do you want to be able to do that, but when you are learning it English to Russian or Russian to English, something in your brain changes and it kind of internalizes, and that word becomes cemented in there a little bit more. And it becomes a little less like memorizing and a little bit more like, okay, I know that word now. The other thing that you're going to want to do here, I know that sometimes you can't, but is you're going to want to say the words out loud. Don't just memorize all your Russian words in your head. You'll become good at reading that way. You'll be able to read them, but then when you go to speak them, it's going to be very clunky. It's a different language than what we're used to speaking. We have to move our tongue around in a different manner. And if we haven't practiced that out loud, when you go to speak them, it's going to be all different. And your mind's going to be like, whoa, I'm saying all these crazy different things. And then you're going to forget about what you're saying and you're going to be focused on the pronunciation. Here's another little one that works for you. It doesn't work on all words, but it works on a lot, is to make an association. I can remember one of the first words I ever learned in Russian was znat. And, I was a freshman in high school. I was young, never learned enough foreign language to know how languages worked. I wasn't real good at school. School was kind of hard for me. So I was trying to memorize this darn word, znat. I couldn't do it. And my dad came over and he's like, well, what are you trying to do? I'm like, I'm trying to memorize this word. And I can never remember it. And he's like, well, what's the word? And I said, znat. He's like, well, what's it mean? It's like, to know. It's the verb to know. He's like, well, that's easy. I was like, well, what do you mean that's easy? He's like, znat. It sounds like snot. It comes out of your nose. So znat means to know. That was just brilliant for me. I never, ever forgot that word again. And I could just use it anytime I needed it. Now, obviously, that doesn't work for every single word. And you may be thinking, yeah, but when I go and I need that in a conversation, am I going to have to think through that whole association? Okay, I want to say to know, which means nah, which comes out of my nose. That's going to take me forever. No, it's going to put it into your brain. It's going to help you memorize it. And the more you use it, those associations gradually fall away. Here's another really effective way to memorize words. Take a word, put it into a sentence. So let's take the example of kniga, book. You could say something like, Я читаю книга. Now, grammatically, that's not correct. I didn't put the right ending on there. But at this point, we don't care. We don't care about grammar. We're just learning the word kniga. So we don't worry about anything else. We don't let all the other grammar and everything else associated overwhelm us. And if you don't know enough Russian to put it into a Russian sentence, that's okay. In fact, sometimes I even think it's a little better. You just say it in your native tongue. You just say, I am reading a kniga. You put it into a sentence there. And I recommend doing it for a whole bunch of different situations. Oh, look, there's a kniga on my bookshelf. Oh man, I went to buy a kniga, but the store was out of the kniga that I needed. Do you see how you do that? You're just gradually replacing the word in your mind. As we're doing this, we're kind of going down this list of, remember how I said you had to kind of familiarize and then memorize and normalize? The methods I'm giving you are working more towards the internalize side of learning the Russian words, and that's really where we want to be. We're not there yet, but we're getting there. So we're using them in sentences. For verbs, like if we wanted to learn the verb to read, читать, then I would recommend just saying it, again, a whole bunch of different ways. Он читает книгу. Он читал книгу. Put it in the past tense. Он будет читать книгу. Put it in the future tense. Anything like that you can think. You just want to say it over and over and over again in a whole bunch of different situations. What we're doing is we're kind of training our brain not only to learn that word means to read or book, but we're telling our brain, hey, be open, if you'll allow me to use that vernacular there, and be accepting. And there is another way to say what we've said our whole life this one way. My whole life, I always said book was book up until I learned Russian. And then I had to kind of train my brain to say, hey, you can say book or you can say kniga. And you kind of have to break the way that your mind has always thought and open it up to another way of thinking, if you will, there. And I think putting it in other sentences is very effective at doing that. Okay, here's another one that will work for some of you. It works really well for me. It may not work for you, but it works for a lot of people. Spend, a minute or two kind of normalizing it, memorizing it, and then I'd like to actually teach it to someone. You know how they say you really master something when you teach it? Well, it's true. Now, if you have somebody who's learning Russian, that's great. You can actually teach it to them and they may get some benefit out of it. But if you don't, then sometimes I'll just teach a word to a friend and they're like, what are you doing? And I'm like, well, hey, no, this is really interesting. Like, maybe we're at a restaurant. I'm like, oh, salt, and I love to say, hey, this is salt, this is salt. And there's a soft sign at the end. It's really hard to say, but you have to do this. And they look at me like, what are you doing there? But I'm like, hey, I got the word swole now. I know how to say it. If you don't have anyone that you can teach, or you think that's kind of weird, or your friends are going to kind of kick you out of their group there, then you just teach it to nobody. Teach it to your pretend friend, make up somebody, hey, this is, Sasha's my good friend here. I guess that's a Russian, you want to be teaching him, but Mike's my good friend, and I'm going to teach him this word to read. And you do that. Hey, Mike, when you want to say to read in Russian, you say chitat. It kind of sounds like she taught, and that's how I remember it. She taught them to read. She taught. But just keep in mind, it's not a she taught, it's a she taught. And you can go on and just, make up a whole different story that way. And then sometimes I even kind of combine the two. I'll say, let's use it in a sentence, Mike. And I go through and I put it in a sentence. I do it over and over. And I say, hey, Mike, how do you say she taught? And I pretend like they're saying it to me and I send it back to them. My light just went out. Oh, well, I have to go on. So anyways, that's what I'm saying about teach it to someone else. I think you'll find that effective. Okay, we started out with normalize the word, just getting used to the sounds. Then we went to memorize the words, and that's kind of what we just talked about right now. But really where we want to go is we don't want to just memorize them. We don't want to be in a conversation and just have, talk like, yeah, she taught, kniga. We don't want to talk like that. We don't want to have to think about every word that we're saying. And you can be darn certain when Russians speak, they're not going to talk that slowly, right? They're just going to lay it out there. And we don't be like, wait, hold on. Can you give it to me word by word so that I can translate this into my head? We just want the ideas to come out of our mouth, and we want them to come into our ears when they're speaking to us. And that's really where we want to go with learning Russian words. And that's what I call the internalizing the words. And this is the really fun part of learning new Russian words. Some of these ideas are going to be a little unconventional for you. And if you're just starting to learn Russian, you may want to wait a couple weeks or months, whatever you feel comfortable with there, until you get a few words under your belt. But once you really start learning Russian words, this is the most effective way to learn Russian words. And this is what I do now. Let's take right here. These are my reading glasses. Can you see that? Yeah. Let's take these right here. Glasses. Очки. If I didn't know the word for glasses in Russian and I wanted to learn them, I would look at the object, and notice I say object, I don't say the English word, and that's the key here, is you never say the English word or your native tongue, if it's not English, whatever it is. You look at this and you be like, wow, I wonder what these are. How do I say this? And I just look at the object and I don't even say it in English. Okay, I don't look at it. I try and just, again, retraining our mind here that these aren't glasses. They're just like, what is this? I just see this object. And if it's if it's like the moon or, the Soviet Union, obviously I can't go look at that. I'll picture it in my mind and I'll just see it. And I just spend, it depends on however long I think it's going to take me, but anywhere from 2 to 3 seconds to maybe 5 or 10 seconds. If it's a verb like jumping, I'll actually see someone jumping and be like, oh, wow, look at what they're doing. They're going up and down. I wonder how I say that in Russian. And I go and I look it up. Now, here's the tricky part. I know you have to look it up. You have to look up glasses in Russian, but I try and you'll get there. You'll get to what I'm understanding here, but I look up the word in English without really saying it or concentrating on it. And when I see it, again, I try not to read the English word. I know you have to find it there, but just bear with me here. It'll make more sense once you do it a couple times. And I look at the Russian and I'm like, oh, очки. And then I go back to the object and I look at it. Очки. These are очки. And I just say that several times, like, oh. And then I kind of go back to some of the other methods we learned about. I may put it into a sentence. Wow, I need очки to read my book. These очки, they need a little bit of cleaning. I say things like that. I literally try and replace the word in my mind from English to Russian. I try and forget the English equivalent. Now you may be like, well, that's crazy. I don't want to forget my English or whatever native tongue you're learning in. I promise you that's not going to happen. Now, if you go over there and you're living there and everyone you're speaking to is Russian, you don't ever speak English, yeah, then you'll eventually, you'll lose your English and you'll take on Russian as your native tongue there. But we're nowhere near that. So anyways, that's where we're trying to get to. And then, когда вы говорите, это очень свободно, это очень легко, и вы даже не думаете об этом. Once you get to that point, you just speak, it comes out, it's easy, you don't even think about the words. Same thing when people are talking to you in Russian. You're not translating every single word. Now, every now and then they're going to throw out a word and you're like, I just learned that word. What was that? Oh, yeah. Or you're like, oh my gosh, I just heard the word I learned and I knew what it was. It's just a great feeling. So anyways, that's where we're trying to get. We're trying to replace the English word into a Russian word. We're not trying to memorize words. We're trying to, what I call it, internalize the word. I have this little thing that once I memorize a word and I get to that point, I feel like it's mine. That word is mine. And anytime anybody else says it, they're just borrowing it from me. That's the point that I want to get to. The last little tip I want to leave you here is, what do you do with those stupid little words that you just can't remember? Normally when we go to memorize a word, we're looking at, let's say we pick 20 words. We're like, okay, I'm going to memorize these 20 words over the next whatever days it is. And undoubtedly, there's going to be the 1, 2, 3, 4 words that you just can't remember. They just don't go in. Here's what you do. You spend a minute, 2 minutes saying the word. You're just trying to familiarize yourself with it. You try and learn it as best you can, and then you move on. You don't worry about it. Now, I know that sounds counterintuitive, especially if you're in school and I've got a test and I've got to learn this. And that's one of the downfalls of learning Russian in a structured environment, but you got to deal with it. You don't want to worry about it. Your mind's just not ready to accept that. Either it's already learned all these other words and it's, putting those in, it's downloading those, internalizing those, and it's working on those, or there's just a disconnect there. Your brain's just like, it's too weird sounding, or I don't get it, or whatever it is. What I have found that is if I spend, you don't want to just skip over them completely. I make a good effort to learn them, and then I just leave them alone. And I'll come back to them maybe a week later, maybe a day later, depending on whatever my schedule allows, and I'll try and memorize them again. And usually, let's say if there were 3 I couldn't get the first time, I'll pick up another one, or I'll get halfway to picking it up. You just go back and you revisit them, and eventually you'll find that you just get it. It comes naturally, like, okay, I got it. So again, we don't want to forget about those words, but we don't want to slow ourselves down. If we need to memorize 20 words and we can't get 2 or 3, so what? You've just memorized 18 words. That's awesome. Move on and do another 20. Don't let those 2 words slow you down for a whole week when you could have done another 20, 30, 40 words. The goal is to become fluent in Russian, not memorize 20 words. We're memorizing 20 words to become fluent in Russian. All right. If you've made it this far to the end of the video, first of all, congrats and thank you. I'd love it if you've given me a like and a subscribe. Really helps me out. But I also want to give you a couple additional resources. Every Monday, I release a video that talks about 15 Russian words. I try and group them into categories. You can go get those videos. They're all included in a playlist on my channel. And the idea there is that you take those 15 words, memorize 2 a day, and then you come back next week and you get another 15. So there's a resource for you. I also have a word of the day, which I email out to everyone. And I want to give a shout out to Omar. He was the first one to sign up for my word of the day. I just started this YouTube channel literally 1 month ago, and I hadn't anticipated anybody signing up for my word of the day yet, so I hadn't really started sending those email out yet. Omar signed up for them, and I think he signed up a couple days ago. And then today he's like, hey, I want the word of the day. Can you send it to me? Help me learn Russian. And I was like, that's awesome. So first of all, Omar, thank you for signing up. Secondly, I want to say that my word of the day will start going out this Monday. That's February 20th, 2023. So if you want me to email you a Russian word every day that you can memorize, you can go to my website, The Green Stick, with stick being spelled STK, thegreenstick.com. And there you can sign up for my word of the day. I give you the word, I give you the stress, I give you its meaning. And if there are any quirks about it, like for nouns, I give you the gender. For verbs, I tell you how to decline it. And if there's anything else quirky about it, I give you that as well. It's a really kind of lazy man's way of learning Russian. All right, I think that's what I've got for you today. Memorizing words is a huge part of the Russian language. If you recognize those 3 phases there, I think you'll become less frustrated. Normalize, memorize, internalize. Ну хорошо, тогда это все. Спасибо и увидимся.